Welcome to your very first lesson. Congrats on starting your journey. We spoke about what etymology is and how it can help you learn words. We're going to look at the very first root word called loqui, which means to speak. We are going to talk about speaking. We're going to look at a bunch of words connected to this root, and also we're going to look at a similar root called log in the next lesson. The fun part is that whatever word we learn in this entire course, which is about 500 and probably over that, will all have a connection with these set of words we discussed today. And this will make itself evident as you go through the course and see how it all relates together. It's one big web of ideas, and we're going to be learning that through etymology in this course. Let's start with loqui, to talk, and these are some of the words related with this. And of course, these are words that you'll find quite useful, especially if you want to use them in big context to talk about complex situations. Don't worry about trying to memorize these words. We're going to go into each of them specifically and understand what they mean, how they come to mean what they mean, and how they should be used in context. Let's start with loquacious. The root ous means to be filled with a particular quality. For example, when something is spacious, it's filled with space. Loquacious, therefore, means to be filled with talking. As you notice, this is an adjective, and an adjective is something that qualifies a person or a thing. Now, when someone is loquacious, what do you think that person's quality is? Well, if your guess is that person likes to talk a lot, you're absolutely right. Someone who is loquacious is someone who is talkative, is characterized by their sort of want to talk a lot. So here are your definitions: tending to talk a great deal, talkative. So loquacious is sort of a fancier word to say talkative. If it of course means a little bit more, it means someone who has a lot to talk about, who can talk quite a bit, and therefore loquacious means a little bit more than talkative. There are a few related words as well. For example, loquaciously is an adverb, as you can see. It is used to describe how an action is done. So he spoke loquaciously over the last 3 hours, for instance. Or loquacity, it's a noun. It's a thing, it's a concept. Even though it's not something that you can touch and feel, it's an idea, it's a concept, and therefore it's a noun. You could say John was well known or was notorious for his loquacity. People would run away from him whenever he entered the room because he was quite talkative. Let's look at an example sentence. The sentence says, my new neighbor is very loquacious. Remember, adjective, it tells me about the neighbor. How is your neighbor? Talkative, full of talking, full of loqui. He loves to talk about his travels and adventures for hours on end. And that is your key there, that this person likes to talk for hours and hours. Brilliant. Let's look at another word with the root loqui: eloquent. Now, eloquent again is an adjective. It describes someone, and in this case, it describes how someone speaks, speaking a particular way rather, and in what particular way. Look at the other root, x. Eloquent has the root x or eu. Um, let's just go with x, right? X eloquent or eloquent in this case. X means out. What do you think that means? To speak out. When someone is able to speak out, what they can do is they can take their ideas and put them out in words very well. They're very fluent, they are very good speakers, eloquent speakers. Words flow through their mouth and they don't have difficulty with speaking. Many public speakers tend to be quite eloquent. So, expressing oneself readily, clearly, effectively, and that's essentially what eloquent means. Again, we have different parts of speech. Eloquence is a quality, or rather, it's a state of being, right? And of course, eloquent has other words which relate to it with respect to being, of different parts of speech. Eloquence, Eloquence talks about a particular quality someone possesses. He is known for his eloquence. It's something they possess. Or elocution, the act of speaking out. For example, you may have elocution competitions, or he participated in an elocution where he came second. There were only two speakers. Let's look at the usage of this word, eloquent. The politician's eloquent speech, so very well framed speech, expressive speech, moved the hearts of the audience and left them with a sense of hope for the future. Notice how eloquent is used to be very good at speaking. I also suggest that eloquent means someone who can persuade others, who's able to move others. And this is one of the meanings, or rather, the hidden meaning that eloquent usually has. It's a very positive word. When you say someone is very eloquent, you are giving them a compliment. The next word is soliloquy. You might be able to identify the root solo here. Solo meaning alone. What do you think soliloquy means? Well, it means someone who speaks alone, or in this case, speaks to themselves. You might ask, why on earth would someone speak to oneself? Well, if you catch yourself being alone for a long time, it's likely that you talk to yourself as well. Other than that, soliloquy is also a device they use in theater plays, where when a character wants to let the audience know what he or she is thinking, they may go into a soliloquy, sort of plotting or deciding out loud. A soliloquy, talking to oneself. So the definition goes speaking to oneself regardless of any hearers. So it doesn't matter who's hearing, you're not speaking so that others could hear you or others can sort of follow what you're saying. It's so that you're talking sort of just to yourself. Either you're processing or you are doing it in a theatrical way. Um, Again, there are parts of speech. For example, as a verb, it's to soliloquize, and a person who does that could be called soliloquizer. Quite a rare word that one is. You can guess by the way it pronounces. It's a very hard word to pronounce, and usually such hard words to pronounce get replaced by simpler words in English language for obvious reasons. But yeah, you see that word ever again, or you want to look impressive when describing someone who likes to talk to themselves, soliloquizer. So here's a sentence. Mary's soliloquy in the play allowed her to reveal her true feelings about the situation to the audience. So again, like I said, it can be used in context of plays, and soliloquy is when one character sort of speaks out, not in an intention to have a dialogue with others, and that's a word we'll come to, but rather to express themselves or to show that they're plotting something. Soliloquy. The next word is colloquial. Now, the root here is co, which means together. Think of it as you talking to someone who is your equal, or you're talking to someone who you're together with, talking with friends or close colleagues. It's not professional, it's not formal, it's colloquial. So, when you talk colloquially, it's informal spoken language or conversations. Now, there is a word derived from this, colloquialism. This has a slightly different meaning, though. Have you heard of the word idiomatic expression or an idiom? Essentially, something that is particular to a region. It's an expression or a set of words which means something more than or other than what it literally means. For example, if I said, he kicked the bucket, it doesn't mean he kicked a bucket. It means someone died. So that's a colloquialism. It's sort of like an idiom. Let's come back to colloquial. The author's use of colloquial language in the dialogue made the characters feel more relatable to the audience. So instead of using very old Shakespearean language or using very formal language, the author uses very relatable, very everyday kind of language, the kind of language you'd use with your friends, colloquial. The next, a very different kind of word, is grandiloquence. The word grand is obvious here. It means big, it's flashy, showy. Have you ever noticed someone who uses big words or speaks in a way to look impressive, to look big and impressive? That person is grandiloquent. Grandiloquence is the act of speaking that way. So, high flowing style, excessive use of verbal ornamentation, that is what grandiloquence means. Of course, you have grandiloquent as an adjective. There is another word called magniloquence, which means something very similar. It means, again, to use big words just for the sake of being impressive. It's not really used in a way to be precise or concise. It's there just to be sort of bombastic and flamboyant and impressive to the others. Magniloquence, and of course, magniloquent. Wagner is a very well-known musician, if I'm not wrong, was not a man capable of avoiding grandiloquence, even when wearing carpet slippers. So, there are some men or some people who, even at home, even in their bathrobes or in their, sleeping gowns, will be very, intent on being impressive and use big words and be very flashy. Grandiloquence or magniloquence. Let's look at the next one, shall we? Somnoloquy. Now, the root som means sleep. I'm sure you might have heard of the word som in another context somewhere. Have you ever heard of insomnia? It relates to sleep, someone who's not able to sleep. And we will discuss this root much more in depth when we go to that chapter, when we go to that particular lesson. Somnoloquy, however, any guesses? Well, if you guessed sleep talking, that's exactly what it means. Somnoloquy is the act of sleep talking. Usually used in medical sort of context, but nowadays it is being used to talk about sleep talking in general by, not normal people, but people sort of who like to use big words. And definitely a word you may come across if you're especially preparing for a standardized test like the SAT or the GRE, a very, very commonly used word. So, somnoloquy, uttering speech while asleep. So, the person who does this is, of course, a somnoloquist. And the act of doing this, if it is, let's say, it's a diagnosed issue, it's a disorder, then you'd call it somnoloquism as a disorder or a thing that you have. The context here, how long are we going to wait out here? Complained Newman in his somnoloquy, right? So, the context is that Newman is sleeping here and he's talking in his sleep. And you might have heard people do this as well. Obloquy. The root ob means against, like obstruct, obdurate. All these words relate to ob, which means against. When you perform or when you're in the act of doing obloquy, and this is a very weird way of saying it, or rather obloquy in itself as a noun, notice it's a thing, that essentially is relevant to the concept of criticizing someone, to talk against someone. And this translates quite obviously here when we look at the root. So, obloquy is essentially public condemnation or criticism in a way that you're questioning their morality, that you're questioning the wellness of them as a human, right? So, it's a public condemnation of sorts, or to put them in disgrace, obloquy. As a result, she became a victim who was subjected to obloquy and harassment. So, words of shame and criticism and condemnation, obloquy. Circumlocution. Have you ever heard of the word circle? Of course you have. Circuit, circular, circumnavigate. All these words use the root circum. Circum essentially means around. Circumlocution, any idea what it means? Does it mean that you talk in a circular fashion? Well, not literally, but metaphorically, yes. What would you say when someone doesn't get to the point and sort of beats around the bush, goes around the topic, doesn't get to the point? That is called circumlocution. To be indirect, to be evasive and not getting to the point. Ask a politician about how much of work they've done towards the promises they made before election, and you will probably be received with circumlocution. So here is the definition: an indirect way of expressing something. Essentially, that's what it means. And of course, as an adjective, when someone speaks that way, you'd say they are being circumlocutory or they are being circumlocuteous. Either of these are good alternatives to circumlocution when you want to describe or qualify the way someone speaks. He speaks circumlocutorily. um, the context, he shuddered at his own craven circumlocution. Craven meaning very, very cowardly, right? Using so meaningless a word to obscure so heinous a truth. So essentially, someone did something really bad and they didn't want to tell the truth, and therefore they used a lie to cover themselves. Circumlocution. So in this case, it's used to mean a lie or a sort of deviation from the truth. Take a look at this. Have you heard of the word ventriloquist before? The root ventre or ventris means belly, and it doesn't seem so obvious when you look at the root. And you will see many roots like this, where the root doesn't really make sense directly, but you need to understand the story behind it to know how it all connects together. Um, a ventriloquist is someone who has a little puppet in their hands and makes it look like the puppet is the one that's talking, right? So instead of talking from their mouths, they talk from their bellies. They make sound from their bellies, and that's the idea here. They are not really producing sound from their mouth. The sound comes from the belly, or rather, it is pushed towards from their belly to outside. A ventriloquist. The profession itself is called ventriloquism, and the act of doing this is ventriloquy. Looking at a context, it was almost as if someone else was speaking, a ventriloquist maybe, using my voice. So, have you ever been in a situation where you sort of have an adrenaline kick and you're speaking things in response to something, but you have sort of an out of the body experience? You are not really speaking; someone else is, but you are the one speaking. If that makes any sense, that's the sort of situation that this particular sentence is talking about, as if you're a ventriloquist dummy. And that brings us to the end of this lesson. I hope you found this informative. And that brings us to the end of this lesson. How wonderful! We've learned a bunch of words related to the root loqui. In the next lesson, we are going to look at the root log, again, which means to talk or speak, and we're going to see the words related to that. Can't wait to see you in the next one. See you soon.